So, may I please invite the panelists, Bernhard, Christiane, and Gintaré, Karolina. Ah, this is you. We've not met yet. Nice to meet you. Is it Karolina? Karolina, okay. Please join me on the panel.
Do you have a sitting order or something?
The sitting order is wherever you wish. Yeah. And then we have also Joshua Bengio online. That.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, you're. Oh, excellent. Do I have to? Okay. Hello, Joshua. We can see you. You're being displayed on the screen. Yeah. Join
Great.
us. Thank you. Yeah. So, I'm Viktor Jirsa. You have heard me this morning. I'm listed here as a moderator of this podium discussion. Until approximately 20 hours ago, I was one of the panelists. Yeah. But unfortunately, Walter Senn, the organizer and the driver of this podium discussion, he can actually not join us for health reasons. He would have loved to be here. His heart and spirit was in this, and he designed it actually. So I was asked to moderate this. I will do my best. Yeah, we do it together. Walter suggested an emergent, self-organized moderation with me at the front. Let's see what comes out of that. Yeah, but I have received also some slides. So first of all, we have the panelists here. This is Joshua Bengio, welcome remotely from the University of Montréal. Christiane, that you have just heard, professor at the University of Bonn and the director of the Life Ethics Center. Bernhard Schölkopf, you have seen yesterday, director of the Max Planck Institute. And Karolina Dziugaite. Very good, thank you. The senior researcher at Google DeepMind. Yeah. So, here, special thanks to Walter Senn with regard to this. This podium discussion actually connects seamlessly to the keynote lecture that we had before, and it's actually supposed to be centered at the interface threefold actually: AI, neuroscience, and ethics. Yeah, and we have organized the podium's discussion around 4 questions, yeah, or 4 topics that we can actually. I will keep them displayed here for the panelists. This is what Walter sent us as a Google Doc, so you're all aware of the topics. And the way we wanted to structure it is as follows: we start with a sequence of 2 minutes each of statement. It can be a little shorter for you, Christiane, because you just spoke about this topic, but at least definitely you can say a word on neuroscience, interface neuroscience, AI, and ethics. 2 minutes, make an opening statement, each of you, and what your personal relationship is with regard to this. I can actually make a 1-sentence statement with regard to this. And then we go into these individual topics. We will see to what degree we can actually integrate the audience. Yeah, my personal statement, I can start with that, is I do work directly at the interface and encounter ethical questions, in particular in the context of clinical translations. I'll give you 2 questions that I can get regularly. Digital twins, how do you dare to use them when they're not correctly validated yet in order to guide clinical decision making? Question number 2, how do you dare to withhold this technology because it has a potential to help the individual patients? Yeah? Not simple. There are ways forward, but not simple. Yeah, that's my 1 sentence statement. Bernhard. I can start with Joshua. Yeah, Joshua, please go ahead.
Sure. So I'm a machine learning researcher, and I'm known for my contributions to deep learning. And with respect to the subject of this panel, my position is that we should not build machines that could create catastrophic harm. And in particular, maybe connecting to the question that was asked to the previous speaker, before we give too much agency or even agency at all, and further down the line, maybe even moral status to some entities, we need to make sure those entities will not create catastrophic harm for humans. And right now, we don't have the answers to this. If you look at the data, not the hype from Sam Altman, if you look at the data, the capabilities of AI are on a steady rise over the last 5-10 years, even exponential according to some metrics. And so I think whatever we believe, we don't know what the future is. We should prepare for the case where we will build machines that are as smart or smarter than us across most cognitive abilities, eventually bodily control abilities, which is still lagging right now. And right now, we don't know how to make sure these systems will behave well. And there are both empirical observations of them behaving badly, showing deceptive and self-preservation behaviors, and theoretical reasons to be concerned. So I think there's an urgent need to better understand what we're doing according to the precautionary principle before we get into a situation that is irreversible.
Thank you very much, Jirsa. Very clear. Bernhard?
Thank you. Yes, maybe first of all, thanks to Joshua for getting up so early in the morning, which will allow me to see my family tonight and maybe contribute a little bit to human flourishing on that side. So I'm not an expert on any of these topics of the panel, I think. At the same time, I think I've been in contact with all of them in my own sort of intellectual development. I actually moved into AI. Most people don't know that. Originally, because while I was a student of physics mathematics, I got somehow in contact with a working group in the Institute of Practical Theology. And that was a working group interested in questions of constructivism and eventually also neural networks and AI. And I remember we were discussing at the time many of these problems, like the kind of problem of replacing neuron by neuron, the Chinese room argument, all these questions that we are now struggling with again, but maybe struggling in a more virulent way, since now we suddenly seem to be in this situation that some of these things that seem just mind games and science fiction might suddenly become much more realistic. Now, after having been exposed to these topics in this theology working group, I decided to leave physics and move into AI, learn about neural networks and data learning theory. But I think these philosophical questions have always been in the background for me. And I think in the last few years, they have been becoming more present for me again, because I moved from standard machine learning to the problems of causality, which, as I discussed yesterday in my talk, is very much related to not just observing the world and looking for statistical dependencies, but also understanding how the world will react to our actions and building interventional models of the world, or maybe something that ultimately we could call a world model. And I think now coming back to the original philosophical problems, so for constructivism, the constructivism is this area that brought together ideas from psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy, and was very much dealing with this idea that the world that we perceive is a construction of our mind. And of course, everything we perceive is happening in our brain. So I think that also connects to one point that Christiane was making before, that this illusion, one could say, that if we use a tool and we touch something with the tool, that our consciousness is out there at the tip of the tool, maybe vanishes, or the illusion vanishes once you remind yourselves that everything, the whole world out there, in a certain sense, is in our brains, is a construction of our brains. And now, if you take this seriously, and you want to explain this riddle, why it seems to be the case that there is a stable world out there, and we can talk to our neighbor about it, and they seem to be perceiving to some extent the same world, then you have to ask about, and maybe also even mathematically, and I think this is where it gets interesting, at least for me, you can ask, why is it possible that this construction of our mind might have something to do with an objective reality out there? And I think what I find scientifically exciting about our field is that maybe we're now at a point where we can start studying this mathematically. So I think probably we'll come back to all the ethical problems later. I don't want to stretch my opening statements, so I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernhard. Yeah. And Karolina.
Yes. Hi. So my name is Gintaré Karolina Dziugaite. So I'm also not an expert, I would say, on the topics that the panel is centered on today, but my work has been focused on looking under the hood of deep learning, which I think is very relevant actually for safety and trustworthiness of these systems. So some of the questions that I've studied in my research are understanding the line between generalization and memorization. So generalization, we have models. We obviously see some generalization. So we have models actually learning the patterns in the data that seem to be somewhat kind of transferable to new situations, right? But on the other hand, we also know that deep learning systems memorize heavily. We can reconstruct, entire books, various other parts of the training data and so on, which is problematic. So some of my research has been looking into when is this happening, what kind of data is being memorized, what parts of the network are responsible for memorization. Other understanding work that I've been doing that I believe is relevant, again, for these questions is on unlearning, which closely relates to memorization, because now we might want to remove some of the data some of the information that we learned during, let's say, pre-training. Also the work on sparsity. Again, I believe that it uncovers a lot of understanding about deep learning systems, because now we kind of know how they compress information, or where in the network they compress information. So kind of questions like that, which I think are very critical actually for safety aspects. But at the same time, they're also, I think, are critical for driving progress forwards. So a lot of the stuff led to actually improvements in state-of-the-art. For example, our work on understanding data difficulty, what examples are being memorized, what examples affect generalization the most, also affected, for example, scaling laws. And you can get better scaling laws if you select the particular data. So I think it's important for both sides. So it's not like, if we study safety, we'll not make progress. I think the two go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karolina. Christiane, do you want to 1-2 sentences and then we take it from there? Just to give you an opportunity to quickly position yourself after your keynote.
Perhaps I want to bring in just one aspect. My major ethical concern for our times regarding neuroscience and AI is the tech political business complex, because this is undermining our freedoms. And from the ethical point of view, freedom is my guiding principle.
Okay, freedom of the individual, I assume that too.
And of societies. Yeah, so democratic societies that are declining at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. Yeah. The best way to go through that, I suggest that we take these questions here that we have discussed as a guideline. We don't necessarily have to go through this in the order, but these are the topics that we would like to wish to tackle upon, and we welcome also contributions from the audience. One aspect that came up also in your opening statements is essentially the topic about how far we can actually go with the human. So the improvement of the human, we discussed this also in the context of the digital twin. Yeah. What is upcoming at the moment, and this is probably a technology that we will have in the future of foundational models, maybe of the individual. Yeah. Can be mechanistic or data-driven, but will allow us actually to simulate scenarios and potentially also lead to the situation of where we can actually help to improve the individual. Yeah? It can be directly on the brain, or it can be also with other enhanced prosthetics, for instance, aspects like this. Yeah, so they get that get us into the question: how far can a personalized brain model and prosthesis? How far we can take this actually? Yeah. This would be the first. I don't know if anyone of you would like to get started on this. I had Bernhard or Joshua for this question in mind. Bernhard, you were approaching the mic. Please go ahead.
Okay, so if I look at the first question, so I think if we're trying to understand the brain, maybe there's at least two fundamental different approaches. And one would be to look at everything in great detail. We poke electrons into the brain. We try to measure many neurons at the same time. We develop new imaging modalities. We maybe stimulate things, measure the responses, etc. So we want to get a mechanistic understanding from the ground up using all the technology we have. I was in touch with this kind of approach when I got my first job at Max Planck. I was hired into a neuroscience institute, and I was trying to contribute to this direction. And personally, at some point, and maybe I gave up too early, at some point I got frustrated with this approach, and I became maybe more of a fan of the other approach. The other approach being, let's try to understand what are the tasks that humans and other animals need to solve in order to exhibit intelligent behavior. And how can we best try to understand these tasks and solve them in silico? And sometimes this can give you an understanding of what's going on that is maybe even to some degree independent of the implementation. So, and I think that's one possible way to address this. So can AI do better than a mechanistic brain model? Then I would say, I don't know if it can do better, but I think we've tried for a long time to understand the brain purely mechanistically. And if we're honest, we haven't come very far with that. So I find it very interesting to now also try the second approach.
Joshua, would you like to comment on this?
I completely agree with Bernhard, but I would maybe say it slightly differently, because I've been involved in the movement since the 80s of trying to do something in between, where we take some inspiration from the brain, like the fact that we have these neurons that they adapt by changing synaptic weights, and they communicate through their axons to lots of neurons, and many other properties like this that are very abstract. And we combine these kind of architectural structures with mathematical principles about learning. You know, simple things like those synaptic weights are changing towards the optimization of something, and we don't know what is this the right something for the brain. In machine learning, we've explored all kinds of variants of what it is that may be good to optimize. And we see now, you know, what works in frontier AIs, but it doesn't mean that this is the last word. So there's been historically a synergy between the work in neuroscience to understand the brain and the work in AI through this whole aspect of machine learning based on neural nets. But I would like to add something to this that's connecting to the philosophical question about safety, about consciousness, agency. It has been the model for AI, whether you come at it from the neural side, like I have, or people in classical symbolic AI looking at reasoning. The model has been human intelligence, and it has served us fairly well. We've made a lot of progress. We have now, according to Jeff Hinton, the best explanations for high-level capabilities of human brains. The best explanation we currently have are these advanced neural nets. Of course, they're not like brains, but we don't have any mechanistic, faithful models of the brain that can compete right now. But that strategy, although it has served us well, is now, I think, something we should stop. And the reason is very simple, because if we do build machines that are similar to us in terms of cognitive machinery, except they're digital brains, meaning they are immortal. You can copy your weights onto another machine, meaning they can communicate with each other billions of times faster than humans can with each other. Meaning they can rewrite their own code, which we can't, for the most part. Let's see, we haven't figured it out. And so on, right? So although the underlying mathematical principles of learning and maybe some of the architectural properties could be similar to human brains, the result is a very different kind of entity. And if they're anything like us, they wouldn't want to die. They would want to preserve themselves. And we would potentially be a threat to that because we want to replace them with the next version. We're starting to see these behaviors. So I think we should be very careful and instead ask the question of the technology we build, what is it we want? Most people would want, technology to help them, maybe to advance medicine, climate science, and not necessarily create competitors to humanity. But if we continue on the path of trying to build machines that are at our image, except they have the advantage of digital technology, we're taking huge risks.
Yeah, this is Viktor again. I thank you for pointing this out. So you mentioned agency, and what you described is essentially a route towards an uncertain future with huge risks. Or said differently, these agents become conscious at some point, and we enter into a competition between superhuman AI, for the reasons that you evoked, and us simple humans. Earlier, Christiane said that is not possible. Yeah, she had a slide where she very clearly said she wrote what AI cannot, or something like that, or is not, or has not, something like that. But the bottom line is, I found her arguments very convincing. But then again, everything becomes, it's not black and white. So, for instance, a prosthesis, which is not living matter, can be accepted by the body and will be integrated into this and can actually be identified or can be accepted as being part of your body. The question that Mihai asked earlier, how far do you have to go in order to make the transition from living matter to non-living matter? So what I'm struggling with are these fuzzy boundaries. Yeah? And I wish it were a yes or no binary, but it's all fuzzy. And there you could actually argue, okay, if it's fuzzy, let's unfuzzy it and let's declare it. Let's remove all consciousness of the AI. This would be one possibility. We do not allow to go into this direction. Or we simply declare anything that comes from non-living matter, it's simply not conscious, hence it doesn't have these rights. Or whatever it comes out of this is just faking it, and that would address actually Joshua's comment with regard to this. So that's a declarational approach that removes the fuzziness. Any reactions to this, Joshua? And then Christiane, I would like to hear.
Just quickly.
Go ahead.
There's another option, which is to create tools that don't have anything close to consciousness. And one extreme view of that I'm personally working on in my research is how do we build AI that doesn't have agency but understands the world causally, just like Bernhard was talking about. Really understand the cause and effect, but doesn't have any goal, doesn't have any self. It's just a good causal model of the world with the right inference machinery so that we can, use it in our advances for better, humankind and advancing science in safe ways. It is possible, but then we go away from the model of building something like us, which is a conscious choice that we couldn't make. And I'm curious to hear from Christina, what are the fundamental reasons why she thinks that AI could not one day reach the same level of abilities as humans?
Yeah, thank you for the question and this very rich discussion. So I think that a living organism is something completely different than an organism from dead material. But I don't want to exclude.
Include or exclude?
Exclude that one time in the future, even material sciences come so far that you can rebuild everything, and for example, from stem cells, even organic materials, and you bring them together to robotic machines, to humanoid robots, and they run around here in the room, and you cannot distinguish them from the outside. So I meet you, Viktor, and I cannot decide whether you're a robot or a synthetically produced humanoid machine, or whether you're a human being who was born. And I wonder, those thought experiments, we do that since 20, 30 years, and it's informative and important and interesting because we think that some elements like human dignity or being born or being from organic material or so are so self-evidently important, but it's not. Yeah, so that's why we have to question this. All of a sudden, if we can do something on a technological way, we say, oh, we always thought this would be this or that way. And now we see, well, no, that's questioned. And that's the interesting thing about it. And of course, as you say, Viktor, we can decide not to, or Joshua, we can decide not to produce that, or we can decide to declare it this or that way, or we can decide to have legal frameworks. But actually, in the end, things will happen like society deal with that. And what I feel, at least, it's my careful impression, is that they appreciate artificial agents that are comfortable and that they find it interesting to have a friend sitting at the table who is kind of a digital twin or digital friend or humanoid robot and so on. There are already things like that out there, and you pay a lot of money for that. And there are some people who buy that and want to have that kind of friend. And I wonder what societies will bring about and what will develop actually, despite of legal requirements or despite of our preferences or despite of very prudent and clever technicians and scientists who say, no, we don't want to do that. There will be one out there who does it. Yeah, like the cloning in China and so on. Mm-hmm. So how to build a shared world of values where we say, and where we debate whether we want to have that limit or that boundary or that distinction, or whether we say, well, it's not so important and it will develop.
So what I heard is that Christiane has not excluded the possibility that we will have some conscious AI in the future, but at the moment we need to make some pragmatic steps to go forward.
I would phrase it a bit different. I would not exclude that there is something that we perceive to be conscious. Yeah? Don't know whether it is.
Yeah. Karolina, would you like to add to this?
Not add to this, but actually I wanted to comment on the mechanistic brain, but more from like medical application perspective. So I think one key difference that I see between like AI and this, mechanistic brain model is that so far we've been training AI models from like a very statistical perspective, right? So we create benchmarks, we test these models, we look at performance. So for example, accuracy, we get some kind of guarantees. 99% of the time it will work, which seems fine in certain perspectives, right? And in some cases, in fact, we actually want this uncertainty. Like when I think about very creative tasks, inventions, things like that. But when I think about like mechanistic brain, I think the key difference is like, would 99% be satisfying? What does it even mean, right? Especially, if I fall outside that 99% as an individual, because these guarantees that we obtain are average. We're just saying on average, this is how often it will work. Think about the individual brain scenario, would 99.999 work? Again, I don't think that's actually true if I'm making very kind of critical health decisions, right? Should one operate somewhere or intervene somewhere? So I think we kind of need to rethink that the way that we evaluate. Maybe part of it is data collection, right? Because right now evaluation is really kind of data-driven. And when I think about these medical applications and kind of brain models, do we even have the data? And especially at individual level, would we even have that data ever? So I think that's where maybe kind of theoretical and very deep understanding of whatever systems we built would be critical. But as I said, it's more like, away from your conversation, but kind of more towards where could we use it right now for medical impact.
Do you want to react to this? Otherwise, go on, because I saw you, Bernhard, that you were reaching for that. Go ahead.
I think we're already moving kind of into the second point.
Well, no, we are actually jumping between points, which is perfectly okay. Let's follow the flow.
So, I don't want to take sides as to whether there's something fundamentally different between living material or not. But I think it is possible that if consciousness has, so there's two arguments. One is if consciousness has a biological function, which I think is very likely, otherwise it wouldn't have evolved. And certainly there's not just one consciousness. There are many different aspects. I can even think of some aspects that I think could play a role in a world model. Because if you have a world model and you want to simulate what's going to happen as a consequence of your actions, then probably you also need something in that model that represents the subject that is taking the decisions. So there are sort of scientific reasons maybe why people will want to understand this in artificial systems. But even independent of that, I think we have to, and I should say, I agree with what has been said about that it would be better not to develop systems at this point, certainly not to develop systems that have an artificial form of consciousness. At the same time, I'm realist enough to say that if it's possible, people will develop it somewhere. Because if you look into what's going on in these companies, and I think, I have many students that work there, I think Joshua also, if you talk to them, they feel like they're on the verge of a breakthrough to artificial general intelligence, whatever that means. And many of them are trying to do everything to make this breakthrough. They feel that this is a revolutionary moment in human history. So they are motivated to do that. And in addition, and I think that's something that Christiane mentioned before, there's a huge amount of money in this business. And even if we don't talk about the money all the time, it is the hidden driver of many of these innovations in the background. So the valuations that these companies get are outrageous. And even unfortunately, money is even driving some of the discussions about existential risk. So there are people like Joshua who are dedicating all their time now to warn about risks of AI, but there are others who use this sort of science fiction fantasies to become prominent themselves. There was a famous sort of someone who fashioned himself as a whistleblower at OpenAI, wrote a blog post that a lot of people read, and then subsequently started, I don't know, an investment fund or a hedge fund that's worth $1.5 billion and is now making money with AI. So we should never underestimate how much money is driving the behavior of people, and this is not necessarily going in the direction that's or it's very likely not to go in the direction that's in the best interest of all of us.
Add a little bit. So I totally agree, and in fact, like, the reason why I was not really commenting, because I believe, to some extent, it's already happening, right? We had examples from the audience earlier that, they're like, people are already interacting with the AI and they're already getting fooled. So it's not quite consciousness, we don't have that, but it's enough to some extent to fool certain people, right? And fool maybe is not the wrong word, but, they're truly being affected. So whether we want this or not, it's happening, and I think it will happening. It's all, there are tons of businesses that are being driven by this, perhaps. So I think we need to think about the regulations, maybe safety aspects, and the research that would complement that, rather than think how to prevent it or avoid for it to be happening.
Go ahead, Joshua.
Thanks. So about whether, something is living or not, I think this becomes almost a theological question, but as far as science is concerned, there is no boundary that is clear between, living and dead. Chemistry is chemistry, and it's mechanistically interpretable. But anyways, I think the important questions are what has been discussed after about the direction in which we are, where profit maximization is bringing us, and the impulses that humans have, say, to create, new friends when they feel lonely by using AI, or to seek more status or more power using AI, and so on and so on. But there's something I want to react. I think it was Bernhard who said, if it can be built, it will be built. And I think we have to fight as much as we can to avoid that, because there are things that can be built that will destroy us all. And a good example is mirror biology, mirror bacteria. That there was a recent workshop on this topic by experts. I'm not an expert, but we can create the molecules of life that have the mirror 3D structure, and they would behave exactly as normal life, except that our immune system, for example, would not recognize those bacteria or those organisms, and would thus be defenseless. So it could threaten all of animal life on the planet. And so clearly we shouldn't build it, right? Now, the thing with AI is, I think there's similar really dangerous possibilities, but there's a lot of money to be made and a lot of appeal, because it could help us materially, medically, and so on. But nonetheless, I think we have to try our best to try to avoid these, this movement and mitigate the risks. So even if it's hard, the stakes are so high that I think we just have to do everything we can to at least delay those events until we have better solutions. So, for example, I don't think it's hopeless. For example, there's been proposals to put special circuitry on AI chips, which are very powerful and are only produced in a couple of places in the world. That would help control some of the AI abilities, that to verify, for example, that different countries use AI or deploy AI in ways that are according to whatever treaties they have agreed together. So I'm not saying these sort of things would be easy, but we have to try. And even if there was only a 1% chance of avoiding these catastrophes, we should just get at it and do our best. Because I have children, I have a grandchild, and I want them to have a life in a democracy, preferably.
Thank you. I would like to actually push this point a little further. Josia, you said that in your group is being investigated, I think in Bernhard's group also, AI without consciousness, how we can actually explore this. So let me put a different perspective on this. This would be one safe approach, yeah? AI is not conscious, then we handle the problem by avoiding the problem. Yeah? That's one approach. There may be other people. I'm thinking of Damasio, for instance, coming from neuroscience, philosophy, and others, that would say that conscious AI is not just only driven by our interest to understand ourselves, yeah, who we are, our functioning, but actually that it is a necessary feature of AI in order to become more powerful in the future to serve some of these things that we discussed earlier. Karolina pointed this out, companions, for instance, or in medical applications, things like this, that this is a functional element in the functional architecture of AI of the future. So if that is the case, I would like to pose the question, what are the safety measures we have to put in place in order to control such type of AI? So not necessarily by not making it, that would be an approach. Yeah. Are there other types of approaches that can be developed that allow us to safely use such type of conscious AI in the future? You just mentioned these elements on the chips. Are there any other ideas on any other ways forward? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
And then Josia first, then Bernhard, then Christiane. She didn't raise her hand. I'm just declaring. Josia, go.
So there's a community of researchers who are trying to find the answers to the questions you asked. Mostly they go under the name of AI safety research. And there are two main angles, and we don't have the answer to your question, but I think that there is work, not enough. There are two main angles. One is called alignment, the other is called control. So on the alignment side, what we want to do is make sure the AI understands what we mean, is not going to be biased in that understanding, and is going to follow our instructions, especially the moral instructions, do not do X. So that's alignment research. My sense is we'll never have it perfectly, but we can make progress. There's, I think, good chances that we can make progress if we focus enough on this. The second kind of branch is called control, and maybe it's a word that has a lot of overtones. But the idea is, if we don't solve the alignment problem perfectly, we can have another layer of computation whose role is to look at your mental inhibitions that detect that you're about to do something with bad consequences and stops you before you do it. And in computer, it's very easy to do that. And for that, you don't need agency, actually. You don't need consciousness. All you need is to make good predictions about the cause and effect relationships that exist in the world so that you can predict that an action will cause something that is considered bad. And of course, there's a lot of work in defining what that means outside of computer science. And so my own research is, first, how do we build machines that are going to be completely trustworthy because they're non-agentic and because they understand our language? And a first application of something like this actually is as this kind of guardrail that at every moment is checking the inputs and outputs of an AI agent that is not perfectly aligned, in order to make sure, to block actions that would be predicted to be harmful.
Thank you, Bernhard. Before just a second, may I also ask in the audience, just think if we may have time for 1 or 2 burning questions. So think about this hard, and we'll try to integrate this. Yeah, Bernhard.
So maybe slightly complementary to what Joshua just discussed. There's of course also the issue of if we agree that certain things should not be done, how should we make sure that this happens into this international context, that there's a strong asymmetry, that some countries have these methods, others use them, others just suffer from them. So there's a strong imbalance there. And of course, some countries or some areas are trying to regulate. We have the AI Act in Europe. We all know that these questions are not trivial, how to regulate that. Are we regulating only the applications, or do we think we have to regulate the foundational models themselves because they could be applied in certain ways? So these are all very difficult problems. And I want to just bring up one additional thought, which discussed a lot with Joshua last month in Montreal, which is that maybe it's not enough, or maybe it's not even the best solution. I don't know, I'm not an expert, to just look for a political solution. For various reasons, it's difficult to regulate something without understanding it yet. It's difficult to regulate it if there's this international competition. And the other solution could be more of a technological regulation, a little bit inspired by what we have with open source licenses. So what we could have, for instance, there could be some kind of license. Many of these models are now published. There could be a license that's published along, or that people who open source or publish the weights of their models could sign a license or subscribe to such a license, which might be a declaration that certain things they don't want to do, and nobody who uses this code is allowed to do those things. Now, we all know that's non-trivial to do, but at the same time, we know that the open source movement has completely changed the software world. I used to work for Microsoft for a few years, many years ago, and Microsoft was avoiding open source software altogether. The lawyers were even worried that we were using Emacs to edit our code. And now Microsoft is doing open source code. So it would be great to have a world where initially just some countries that are willing to take these problems seriously, or some organizations come up with such a license, and people start voluntarily to use this license, and maybe it's going to be infectious, or it can even be built into the system that is contagious. If you build something on my AI code, and I've published this code with certain guardrails, what you can use it for, then maybe your code that builds on it has to use the same license. So this is a model that also comes from the open source world. I think something like this could be a chance, and that eventually maybe all companies and countries gradually have to agree to similar principles or a similar kind of license.
Thank you. Christiane?
I would advocate for an ethics by design approach when developing AI. So ethics by design approach means that you think about ethical values and ethical impact from the beginning. And that is when developing a technology for everyday use, or even for developing conscious AI or something similar like that, so that you can build the AI according to the values and also the application, the deployment of AI. And so not developing the technology and then saying, oh, oops, there are this and that problems, but to think of it at the beginning and to build it in a technological way, or in the way the selection of data you use to train them, or in several steps technologically thinking, and also in the societal implementation. What I also think is, if we really assume, or let's think that it is possible to have a conscious AI, what would that mean for the development? Do they have to go to the kindergarten to learn to live in societies? So it is not immediately an adult consciousness. Yeah, it has to develop, and also values cannot be programmed. So please respect autonomy. How do you want to do that? Yeah, so you have to apply it in concrete context. You have to have always different values that you have to weigh. How to program that? Yeah, that has to be learned in an embodied way, to name it again. And then if a company produces conscious AI, are they allowed to sell them? Because we are not allowed to sell our children. So if we would have to accept them as conscious beings, would they have dignity? Are they worth for themselves? Do we have to guarantee their lives? Have we to guarantee good lives for them? So there are a whole lot of questions coming up there, which have to be thought through. But roughly, I would advertise for an ethics by design approach from the beginning, and that would mean to bring ethicists into the companies, even from different theoretical approaches, really to discuss that and integrate this in the whole process of technological development, deployment, use, and so on.
Thank you. Can I challenge you on one point, Christiane? Yoshia talked about one solution that is alignment. Yeah? Alignment with our values. So it's a type of moral alignment. In your presentation, you talked a lot about decision-making. At the end of the day, for complex decision, you see it worldwide, geopolitical, all the way down to the individual level. It always boils down to the values that you call your own. Yeah. Now, AI does not necessarily have to be conscious, but it has a certain values along which it can be capable of making decisions. Isn't that a compromise, a hybrid version between what you just said, fully conscious and non-conscious AI? How would you deal with that?
I don't know how AI could have values. So it has kind of an optimization strategy inherently, but I don't know where the values should come from in an AI. Yeah, because values. Sorry, where?
I said I do.
Please enlighten us.
Well,
go ahead.
That's not a value.
We use language to communicate with each other, for example, in law, about what is acceptable and what is not. And you can think of it as, in machine learning, a function that separates the things that are acceptable from things that are not, the actions that are acceptable and things that are not. And the typical scenario is a user wants something, but society says, okay, so long as it doesn't cross these red lines. And these red lines are just functions that can be computed. Of course, they're complicated functions. And those functions are computed thanks to the understanding of language and the causal understanding of the world, which Bernhard talked about. So these are not easy, but we're getting close to that in AI. We're moving in that direction. So it's quite conceivable that we get to a point, especially if we put efforts into it, where we can have machines that can check that some user, suggested goal is within the acceptable, set of things or not.
I completely agree with your terminology.
And it could be locally different depending on the culture, of course.
Yeah, of course. But would you say the AI has own values, or does AI execute? Yeah, that's it.
AI only needs to understand what we consider unacceptable. Mm-hmm. That's all it needs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But even in law, you see that the judges in the same case struggle to judge that this or the other way. Yeah, so even words in a law can be interpreted in a very different way, and it's always about weighing, about talking, about discourse, about analyzing, and so on. So yes, I would of course agree. How could I not? That you can program AI so that limits are not overstepped. But I would separate that from the discussion of AI has values. it's our values that we can try to program or to learn AI according to our values, but there will always be an open space where weighing and preferences and so on then necessarily come in.
Karolina?
So I think alignment is a very important topic, a research area. And I agree with you that, even as humans, depending on, geographical location, our background and so on, we have different values. What should we exactly encode, right? How should we exactly align? It's a complicated question. And we often disagree, and often actually there is no right or wrong, right? It's situation dependent. But the alignment itself, I think in AI, it's been viewed or addressed quite narrowly. So primarily we rely on approaches that are based on RLHF, right? And various variations of it. I'm not sure how far it will take us, and I think we need a lot of progress there.
Yes.
Yeah, so defining even what we want from alignment and also kind of thinking of more creative solutions. So another point that I wanted to add on kind of the safety regulation side. So I think that we also maybe ought to model it from, let's say, economical perspective, how things should be or evolve and potential outcomes of it. And I think it's been studied long ago, like 90s earlier, right? And there are lots of old models, and perhaps, of course, they need to be adapted to the current very powerful systems. I'm sure they've been studied in a different context. But I think that's also where we should be investing, kind of having very good models of how to distribute this very powerful resource. How should we control it? What economical incentives should we add in order to get where we want to get?
Thank you. I would like to have a good life. We have 3 questions. Hands have already been raised. We are coming to the end. Please make it short and crisp. If you want a panelist to answer to this directly, please identify his or her name. And let's go forward from the right to the left. We start with you, please. Yes.
Okay, so for me, what is the most worrying aspect of everything what I'm hearing now is that we often say that, okay, we should do this or we should do that. But the reality is that the world is not united. I mean, whatever we decide in this room, well, there's no way to enforce it everywhere. There is no common jurisdiction or something like that. And unfortunately, we have a situation in the world where the area controlled by democracies, we could say, is actually shrinking in the world. So, and it can even have a negative feedback loop where if we restrict certain technologies, we will become even more weak and have even less power to have a say of how this thing should progress. It's a bit similar to arm treaties, and unfortunately we have a situation in the world currently where countries are leaving arm agreements. They are not making new ones. So maybe that's just a worry I want to express, and whoever has an answer, please.
Thank you. This is more a comment of actionable consequences.
I'm happy to say a few words.
Go ahead. Yeah.
This is a very good question, and of course, I wish I had the answer. And but as I said earlier, it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. There are international treaties, and as you said, they're a little bit going down the drain, but it is possible. It is something that we've done in the past, humanity. And about the negative feedback loop, I think that's what a lot of people believe about AI. I actually think it's not quite true. I think the same developments in AI safety can help us solve some of the capability issues. And the connection has to do with reasoning, because in order for an AI to predict that something will cause harm, it needs to be good at understanding causality and reason with that. So I'm optimistic that, at least optimistic enough that we should, try to make it happen and deal with the hard problems you've raised.
Thank you. The second question, the gentleman in the middle, and then Dimitri, I saw you.
Yeah, I have a question for Christiane. Christiane made a distinction between living and non-living systems. Now, if we consider life as a thermodynamic process, then a living system, if we consider it as an open system, its internal entropy can reduce, but as a closed system, it dissipates heat, and the entropy of the universe increases. Right? That's where the second law of thermodynamics comes into play. Now, if you think about an AI data center, the same thing happens. Within the AI data center as an open system, its internal entropy reduces, but it releases tremendous amount of heat. It releases tremendous amount of heat to the universe. So as a closed system, the entropy increases. Now, my question is that, so if you think of the characteristics of life, like consciousness, as an emergent property of thermodynamic processes, why can't it arise in an AI data center?
So if I get you right, you ask between the border or the limit between living and non-living systems. So for me, that is a difference because I come back to the 5 features of living organisms from Hans Jonas. So first of all, a non-living organism stays the same entity without changing its material. And a living organism metabolizes all its material and still stays this identity. If you think of the amoeba, of a bacterium, or of a human being. And I think this is a fundamental difference insofar that there are coming things out of that. This freedom from the material to be an identity nevertheless is coupled with being dependent from material coming from the outside. So a human being or no organism can live out of him or her or itself. Yeah, it needs the outside. And not living material needs mainly nothing. AI needs current or data or so, but that's another process. You can program AI so that it reaches out for other data sources or so, but it's not inherently in the living entity. And from the combination between freedom and dependence, it follows that you transcend yourself into the outside to get the material. And you have the consciousness, the mindfulness, the awareness of having an internal life as contrasted to an outside life, to an external world, the environment. And all these features, all these awarenesses are not necessarily coupled to non-living material. And I think it's another form, it's another ontology, you would say philosophically. It's another kind of being in the world. And it is coupled with features that make a difference in how you relate to yourself and how you relate to others. And with growing complexity, also the ethical values come in, not necessarily only for human beings, also dolphins and elephants and monkeys and so on are moral communities in specific understanding. And with this complexity, I think you can link it back to a difference between living and non-living entities. Do you think that answered your question?
No, I still have a question. I mean, the thermodynamic processes are exactly the same, whether you think about a living entity or you think about the AI data center.
Thank you. Forgive me to cut in here. We have one last question. I would like to give you the possibility for a question, and then we need to wrap up, and we will wrap up with a one-sentence closure statement of every speaker. Yeah, but the last question from the audience, please.
Sure, thank you. I liked a lot Christiane's idea that ethics shouldn't be a restraint to the development of AI, but rather a creative force, if I understood that correctly. And what we see in practice, though, is that the leading players in AI, mostly in the US and China, cannot care less about ethics at this moment. And European Union remains a sort of sleeping beauty of AI. And so since we are in a brainstorming mode, then what European Union could spend billions for by encouraging academic research or small businesses to promote this ethics-driven AI? What could be possible directions?
Who would like to respond to this?
Of course, I have the solution now. No, of course not. But when we had our statement first from the European Group on Ethics and Science and New Technologies at the European Union, we made a statement in 2017 on AI and so-called autonomous systems and so on, and already asked for digital sovereignty of the European Union, the Data Ethics Commission in Germany as well. So they really slept. And now they don't really dare to step up to some claims from the US to take back some regulation or so. I hope they stay clear. It's not that I don't think that the GDPR or the EU AI Act don't have potential for reform or so. Yeah, they're not perfect, but they're at least a very, very good starting point. Also the Digital Services Act and so on. And I would say that the EU should stay clear on and also to enforce this regulation. I think, yes, the economy, the funding schemes, the countries, the cooperation between countries, France made so many offers that were denied, should be there, not to isolate the European Union, but to be digitally sovereign and then to cooperate.
Very good point. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And we will now close this podium with where I would like to ask every panelist in the opposite order as we did it before to make a closure statement, try to compress everything into 1 to 2 sentences and get the essence across in this compressed form. Karolina.
So I've been working on learning where I've seen that lack of problem formalization also led to kind of dispersed progress and lack of benchmarking. So I think what's critical is even defining properly what we mean by things like alignment, what we require from safety and regulations, given the models that we're dealing with right now, because we cannot make rapid progress if we don't.
Thank you very much. Christina.
I would love if the approach of life ethics would be propagated, and if we discuss in our societies how we can use AI and build AI to foster the unfolding plenitude, beauty, and embeddedness of all life.
Thank you very much. Bernhard.
So I think AI is going to fundamentally change our lives. I think this is obvious by now. And it will do so in positive and negative ways. And I'm worried about the negative ways. And I believe for the time being, I cannot predict what happens in 30 years, but for the time being, negative consequences of AI will, I believe, always be connected also to humans using AI for negative purposes. At the same time, I believe most humans don't want to use AI for negative purposes. Most humans fundamentally want to do good things and contribute to a flourishing life. However, the structures are such that there's a lot of money involved, there's financial interests, and I should say this statement that most humans want to do good includes also the people working in frontier labs of AI. They are all human beings. Nevertheless, I think the structures are such that there are financial interests, there are military interests, there's intransparency. The top level of AI is mostly done behind closed doors. So I think, as my conclusion, it is important that the highest level of AI research is also done in places like in Europe, because technology is culturally contingent. And I believe if this is being built here under the public scrutiny, embedded in the value systems that we have here, then it will lead to different outcomes from the other imaginable futures. Thank you.
Thank you. Joshua, please.
Yes, I disagreed earlier with Christiane on where we put the boundary for life, but fundamentally I agree with what she's been saying regarding two things. The importance of ethics by design or safe by design, and that Europe actually has a chance to do it. And it's not one or the other. In fact, they can work hand in hand. I sincerely think, as I mentioned earlier, that by trying to build machines that will behave well, which is a big scientific challenge, we can make both the ethical questions advance as well as the capability of the AI, which means if Europe and friendly liberal democracies sharing similar values actually decide to do it, there is enough capital, there is enough talent in order to push that kind of program. And I think the world needs that, because right now, with the race between the US and China, we're going into a very unstable and dangerous world. So we should just, take that opportunity while we can.
Thank you very much. We have arrived at the end of this panel. We've had wonderful panelists, so thank you very much for your contributions, the discussion, and the audience. Most importantly, Walter, if you hear us, get better, best recovery, and thank you everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.